CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
Let's start off with the basics here. There are a couple of different types. We can actually just do an object literal, a literal. We can do objects from what's called a constructor function standpoint, and then we can have actual class, the class object model, okay? And again, really, these are just different ways of dealing with this whole prototype thing. But for our purposes, we're going to just look at these on a surface level here, okay? So what's an object literal? It's literally an object, right? Let's go back to what we just learned about. Let x equal 10. What do we have here? We have a keyword that tells us something about the scope of the variable. It's also alerting the computer that we're about to block out some memory, and then we're going to call that space in memory x, and then we're going to assign it the literal number 10, or the literal string Bob, or the literal character A, or the literal float, double, whatever, 4.8. Okay? Well, you can also assign it a literal object. And the way you do that is with some curly brace notation. Okay? So the literal object here is simply this. Inside the curly braces here, let me get my semicolon back. Okay? In the curly braces, we have properties. Like I have a name property, let's say. And we use the colon there, and the name is Metallica. Why are you surprised? And then we have vocals, maybe, and it's James Hetfield. Trujillo. There we go. Okay. Now I've made an object called X. Let's call it band, though. That's a better name. Okay. And so now this is a literal object. Now, if you recall, when we talked about this in PHP the other day, we talked about this concept where the class is the cookie cutter, right? We had a class called animal, right, and had some code in it. And then later we said, now I'm writing PHP code here, even though I'm in my JavaScript file, because I just want to demonstrate what we were talking about the other day. But we had on line 14, we have class animal, and then we had something like our $, dog equals new animal or something like this, right? And we said this is the cookie cutter, and this is me stamping out a cookie or cutting out a cookie out of the dough. Okay? Well, you can do this type of model in JavaScript. We'll get to that in a minute. But for now, what I've done here, there is no cookie cutter. This is me grabbing a ball of dough and shaping it into an object without a cookie cutter. Okay? That's what's going on here. But let's see what's happening. I can now look inside of the console here. So let's go ahead and refresh our page. Over here in the console, if I say band, it shows me the object there, right? That shows me this whole object. If I wanted to see the vocals, I can say band.vocals. And it shows me James, right? Band.bass we'll go with. Shows me Robert. Okay, so that's a basic object. Well, you can actually put a function right in here, right? So I can say, we'll call this function, I don't know, play. And it's a function that is just going to say, I don't know, console.log playing fade to black. Something silly like that, okay? There we go. That's a simple function. And notice here, it's an anonymous function like we talked about a moment ago, okay? Also, before we move over, don't forget our parentheses there. Go over here and refresh. And now if I type in band.play, call the function, it says playing fade to black. Okay? So there, I've just made a literal band, a literal object. And I assigned it to this band variable. Okay? Well, I could also make an array of bands if I wanted to, right? So I could say bands equals square bracket, and then we put this object in it. Right? That's the first element in the array. The 0th element is this full object. And then the 1 element is a new object, right? So we're going to make another object that's a different band right here. Playing, I don't know, Too fast for love. All right, so look at this. I made two object literals and they're inside of a band variable that's an array. So if I want to see them, if I come over here and refresh it and I say bands, I guess, 0, that shows me the Metallica object. If I say bands 1, that shows me the Motley Crue object. Now if I want to see the drummer for the second band, I say bands 1 dot drums. That gives me Tommy Lee. Or bands 1 dot play function gives me playing Too Fast for Love. Okay, so this is a literal object. This is actually also known as JavaScript object notation, JSON. You've probably heard of that. You hear it pronounced Jason or JSON. I prefer JSON. But either one, JSON or JSON, that's JavaScript object notation, and JSON is the new XML, right? XML is not really a thing anymore. What XML was, it was a way, it was called extensible markup language. It was a way to basically make your own tags, your own sort of HTML tags, which was very useful for handing things off between two different websites through some website's API. Well, these days they pass off JavaScript objects using JavaScript object notation. So this is a thing that it can be useful, but we're going to make it a little bit more duplicatable, right? Having to copy and paste this every time is kind of ridiculous, right? What if I wanted to add a third band, the Beatles? Kind of messy. So let's go ahead and clear this out, and we will just delete this right here. Okay, and well, actually let's keep it and then we'll copy some pieces of it. So let's start here. We're going to make what's called a constructor function. Okay, and so it's just a function, but it's slightly different. Okay, so we're going to go with function band. Okay, and then we're going to, in the curly braces, now notice here I have band in capital. Okay, that's just convention. You don't have to do that. But this looks like, it kind of reminds me of, class band, right? But it's function band. Well, so far, this is what we've always done, right? We just create a function called something. But let's pass in some parameters here, like name, vocals, drums, guitar, bass, and we won't bother with the function or with this function right here for the moment. We'll get back to that. But now, what we're going to do here is use the this keyword, and we're going to create a variable inside of the function called name, and we're going to set it equal to n, which is this n right here. Okay, and then we're going to have this dot vocal and set it equal to v. This dot drum equals d. Get the idea here. Guitar equals g. Whoa, get all responders, whatever that is. Okay, this dot bass equals b. All right, so now I have this little, it's like a constructor, right? That's why it's called a constructor function. If I say new band, which we'll do in a minute, I can just pass in those parameters. So instead of doing all this, right, I can say something like let Metallica equal new band, and I'll pass in all of these values here. Okay, so we'll just pass in Kirk and James and Lars and all of these people here, right? This is a little bit better, right? Whoa, what just happened there? Okay, we'll talk about this function here in a minute. Okay, so here we go. Now I have a new band called Met, right? Short for Metallica. We'll comment all this stuff out here. And if I run this in the console here, refresh, and I can say Met, and I can see the Metallica band right there. Okay, the Metallica band object. All right. Now I can also add in here, of course, the other folks, right? We'll call this crew, and we'll just put all these values right there. Okay, and we'll put Vince right here. Somehow I abandoned the rest of the band. I'm not sure what happened there. So let me fix this on Lars. So we have Metallica, vocals, James, Lars, and then for guitar we have Kirk. I'm just going to go with first names to save time, and Rob. And we'll do the same thing with the rest of these right here. Not sure what happened there. And so for drums, we got Tommy, and then we have guitar is Mick and Nikki. Okay, so now I have these two objects, crew and Met. Let's take a look here, refresh, go to crew, and there's the band. And now again, I can say crew.bass, and I'll get Nikki and so forth. Met.vocals, get James. Okay, so let's deal with this function here, right? How do we do this? But believe it or not, this is not the ultimate solution here, but I could, if I wanted to, pass this in as a parameter. Check this out. So we're going to have a thing here called P for playing, and I'm going to pass this whole thing right here, function, as a parameter right at the end of this. There you go. There's that anonymous function business again, right? Passing this whole function in right there, and we're just going to say this dot P equals, or this dot play equals P. Okay. And so we'll do the same thing down here for Motley Crue. Put that as a parameter right there. And so I'm actually handing the whole function anonymously, no name, giving it to this variable P, and that's going to assign it to this thing right here called P, or called play. So refresh, and if I say met.play, playing fade to black, crew.play, and it'll say playing too fast for love, right? Kind of weird. It's an anonymous function of being handed off just as a parameter, okay? Well, you don't have to do it that way. You can actually put a function right in here, inside of here, okay? Okay, now the way you do that, rather than passing this in as a parameter like we're doing, which is kind of silly, we can actually just take this and stick it right here, function console.log, playing fade to black. Now, obviously, since band is sort of generic here, we don't want every band to be playing fade to black. So we can actually change this maybe to song, right? And so we'll pass in a song here now. So we'll do master of puppets, okay, puppets. And we'll do the same thing here for the song. We'll pass in too young to fall in love, right? So now what we want to do here, this right now, if we were to run it, let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. Refresh it, and if I say crew.play, it's just going to say playing fade to black, right? No matter what, it's going to say that. So we need to replace this fade to black with the song. Okay, well, we can't do much with it yet. We could just do this, right? Let's see what happens if we do this. Just concatenate on the S here, right? Playing S. Could do that. Refresh, crew.play, and that totally works just fine. So the point is, you don't necessarily have to assign it to this dot song equals S, and then I don't have to go down here and say this dot song. That would also work, okay? But that's just a little bit redundant here, so let's go Metallica.play, a little bit redundant. So just sticking the S down there is fine. The reason, however, you might want to do something like this is if you want to do some data validation, some data checking first to make sure it's the right data type or something as it's being passed in before you just hand it off over here. Okay, so we're going to leave it this way. But now this is getting a little bit cleaner here, right? Okay, so let's make another band here. It's easy enough, just duplicate, and we'll go with beat. So now I got three things here that I've created, and just using this constructor function business here. Refresh, and I can say beat.bass, and I'll get John. Again, that may be wrong, sorry. Beat.play, and it's going to play help. Well, I can also put all these in an array, right? I could have an array of bands, let bands equal met, crew, beat, right? 3 objects, okay? So now if I do this, refresh, I say bands right here. There they are. It's 3 bands. It's 3 band objects, as you can see. First one's Metallica, second one's Crew, third one's Beatles. And of course, bands 0 dot bass will give me Rob, or if I change this to band 1, that gives me Nikki, band 2 gives me John. Okay? All right, so that's the constructor function. This has been around for a while. There's the new syntax that came out with ES6 not too long ago, which is more like what you're probably used to, okay? And that looks something like this. We just say class band, and then we have our curly braces, right? And instead of doing this, we actually have in here a constructor, right? Function, and to be honest, I can't remember if I need the function keyword here or not. I think I don't. Constructor, we'll find out in a minute. And this will take in those parameters, like that. This is probably what most people are used to. So in the constructor, we will do all of this code right here, right? It's exactly the same thing that you're used to in most class object-oriented languages, right? We did this the other day in PHP, and if you've got a Java background, this is very similar, okay? So this no longer is necessary, but theoretically, everything should work exactly the same as it did a moment ago, with the exception of maybe that function keyword is not necessary. So let's find out. Refresh, and yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the problem right there. Get rid of that. And now refresh. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so now it still all works the same. I can say, you know, met.base, and I can see that. Or I could say bands0.base and see that. And the only reason I'm allowed to do met.base is because I declared it right here. Okay. Whether I'm using this technique or the constructor function, either way, I could make this full of anonymous classes here, anonymous objects, right? I could have just put that right here, this line right here. I could just put a new band right there, and then I could do the same thing with this one, right? Just copy that, and instead of putting crew, I would put that, and then I could put this one right here. Instead of putting beat, it would go there, and then this would not exist anymore. And so now this array down here looks a little messy, but it's just full of 3 anonymous objects, right? So if we clean up the syntax a little bit here, or not the syntax, but the layout, this is still pretty straightforward, right? And now it works exactly the same, except I no longer am able to refer to it as met because that doesn't exist anymore, right? There is no met in here, so that's going to give me an error, okay? But if I close that out, refresh, and I open the console back up, and I go to just bands0.base, now I can see it. Except I typed the wrong word there, sorry about that. Refresh one more time. I should have said bands0.base, okay? What about this play business? Does this work the same? Let's see, okay? So we'll back up and we'll say play, and there we go. That also works. However, you can also set this outside of the constructor separately, and we'll make just a regular old function inside of this band thing, right? We'll have a function called play, and it'll have that content in it, where it's going to just console out this .song, which is still being passed in, it's still being assigned right here, okay? So this will all work the same. Ready, refresh, and I get this error because I forgot this needs to actually be an anonymous function. Play equals function, like that, right? Now I refresh it, that error goes away, and I get bands0.play, and everything works just fine. Okay, so there's that anonymous function business again. Okay, next up, we're going to look at just briefly a static method or static function, okay? And this, you already know these. A static function is one that can be called without having to create an instance of the object. For example, math.random. That is a JavaScript static function in the math class. You don't ever instantiate, you don't say let x equal new math. You don't do that. You just call it directly on the class. Okay, this works just like it does in Java. All you got to do is just create a function and call it static. You just literally say static as an extra keyword in front of it. Okay, so static best band ever equals function, and we'll just say, oh, I don't know, console.log Metallica. Okay, so now this best band ever, that does not exist when I say bands bracket 0 dot best band ever. That's not a thing. That doesn't exist. But I still can call that function statically. Okay? All that means is this. I can actually say band dot best band ever. And that will spit out Metallica. The only way to call that function is to actually call it directly on band.whatever. So that's a static function. This is a silly example. But as you see with the math class, right, there's other things like the math.ceil and math.floor and a whole bunch of other things. It can be very useful just to make a class that has a whole bunch of methods in it that are useful where you don't really need to instantiate anything. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this just for the sake of this discussion here, but I just wanted to point out that that is a thing. So let's clean this up a little bit here. And I want to show you, if I wanted to echo all this out, right, you could do a for each loop, right, except it's a little different in JavaScript, right? We're going to use what's called a for of loop, all right? So it's simple. It's for, and then we want to have some variable to represent each individual element as we loop through the array. So in Java, we typically use L, right? EL for element. In my case, I'm going to use the singular of the actual array name. So I'm going to go band of bands. Okay, super simple. Now all I'm going to do is just console.log the name of the band, let's just say. Okay, so that would be band dot name. That's it. I'm just going to echo that out. Okay, or console that out, I should say. Let's put that in some curly braces just in case. And here we go, refresh. And there, just echoed those guys out right there on the console. Okay, so this is a for of loop. Okay, and if you remember in Java, the enhanced for loop, it looks like this. If you don't know Java, you can just ignore this, but if you're familiar with it, it would be whatever the data type was. So in this case, it's some object, element, colon, then the name of the actual array. This is the syntax that you use in Java. Okay, well in our case, in Java, I could do this. I could have used band. The only difference really is that instead of a colon, we use of. And instead of mentioning the data type, we just don't have to bother. But that's it. It's the same basic idea. Okay, so a for of loop, just like a for each loop conceptually. Okay, last thing. Simple overview. We're not looking into any depth here, but I want to point out this idea of a subclass, which is just its inheritance. That's all it really is. Okay, so here I have class band. Let's get rid of these comments here, have a little bit more room to work. And now I want to make, let's say, an orchestra class, right? I don't know. So we'll say class orchestra. I'm going to just abbreviate. Extends, this is the same keyword in Java and in PHP. Extends band. Okay, so now I have this full-blown thing, which is actually a duplicate of band. And so if I wanted to, I could actually add another, let's just make a new band here, but will be an orchestra instead. And we will say that this is GNR, Guns N' Roses, Axl, I don't remember who played drum, and I know somebody named Duff is somewhere in the band. And of course guitar was Slash, and I don't know, some other guy, I don't know GNR's lineup as well. And the song is Welcome to the Jungle, but they also are known for slipping a little orchestra into their band. So we're going to call this the GNR Orchestra, whatever. And we'll leave it like this for the moment, okay? Because right now, orchestra is exactly the same as band. And if I refresh this, we get an error because I forgot a comma right there. Sorry about that. Refresh again. And now it's spitting out everything, even though that's an orchestra object. The rest of this are bands. So if I actually spit out this band's object here, this band's array, you'll see that it has 4 things in it. A band object, a band object, a band object, and an orchestra object. Okay? Well now, just like inheritance in any other object-oriented language, you can do similar things. So what we want to do is have a constructor that does all of this, plus adds a conductor. Okay, so we're going to take this constructor here, right there, and we'll take in all those parameters plus conductor, C. So right here, we're going to say our conductor's name is Bob. Okay, and so now when we create this new orchestra, we're going to hand off GNR O to the name, and so forth. But when we get to the end here, we're going to hand off Bob to C. All right? So if you're familiar with the Java way of doing this, there's the super keyword, the super function. If you're used to the PHP one, we use the parent keyword, right? But we're going the Java route here, just like Java. We say super, and we pass in, whoa, don't need that, just super. We actually hand off all of this stuff that our parent, that's what super is, it's the parent, which is band. So we're going to hand off all the stuff that the parent knows how to deal with, and that's all we got to do there. So this line of code, line 22, does all of this, okay? Just like it does in Java, just like it did in PHP, except PHP we use the parent constructor thing, okay? All right, so now the next thing we want to do is just add this dot conductor equals C. That's it. Here's our constructor. Okay, so if we want now, I can echo that out. Let's refresh. And now what I can do is clear this out of here and get rid of this. And I'll say bands. The third element, I believe, is GNR. Sorry, bands. And I can say dot conductor, and it shows me Bob. Okay. So I know I sped through this object stuff. The reason I didn't stop and go a little bit more slowly is because, number one, we've seen it before in PHP just a few videos ago, a few days ago. We've already seen it in PHP. And if most of you that are watching this have already been through the Java courses, and so you're familiar with the ideas. So I'm not spending a whole lot of time explaining what object-oriented is, because I did that with the PHP videos. What I wanted to really show you is the syntax, right? And there's so much more you can do, right? These are silly little classes that have nothing in them. There's so many more things we can do. As you can see, there's the inheritance here, so you can have subclasses. You can have static methods and all kinds of other things. And the next couple of videos that we'll be doing will be using object-oriented JavaScript. All of the stuff we looked at today had really one goal in mind, was to expose you to it and to give you some level of detail on some of these subjects. But mainly it's so that in a couple of days, when you see some more videos, when we use this stuff, you won't be focused and lost on all the syntax, because you'll at least have been exposed to it in this video here. So hopefully that helps. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time.